They didn't slam the door. No argument, no explanation, no final message. One day they were there, and the next, they were just gone. And somehow that silence was heavier than any goodbye could have been. You've been trying to understand it ever since. Because this wasn't just anyone. This was the person who picked up at midnight, who remembered the small things you forgot you told them, who could sense something was wrong before you'd found the words for it yourself. Being around them felt like exhaling, like you could finally stop holding yourself together. And then they disappeared. Here's what most people never find out. What I want you to sit with right now, their disappearance had almost nothing to do with you, and everything to do with something that was quietly breaking inside them. Long before you ever arrived, what you're about to understand will change how you see them. And if you recognize yourself somewhere in these words, it might change how you see yourself. There is a certain kind of person who moves through the world differently. You feel it the moment you're around them. They don't just listen, they receive you. Every word, every pause, everything you almost said but didn't. They sense the weight beneath your sentences. They pick up shifts in your energy that you haven't consciously registered yet. They make you feel, maybe for the first time in a long time, that you are not alone in the room. What you never see is what that costs them, because an empath doesn't process emotion from a comfortable distance. When you're in pain, their nervous system doesn't observe your pain, it mirrors it. Your heaviness lands in their chest. Your anxiety runs through their body. Your unspoken fear becomes something they carry home with them, long after you've moved on with your evening. This isn't poetic language. Research on high empathic individuals consistently shows measurable physiological responses to other people's emotional states. Elevated stress hormones, disrupted sleep, heightened threat responses, even when the empath is in no danger themselves. Their body is doing real, exhausting work every single time, for every single person. And here's the part that changes everything. This sensitivity didn't arrive randomly. For most empaths, it was built, carefully, quietly, very young. Picture a child growing up in a home where emotions were unpredictable, where a parent's mood could shift without warning, where the atmosphere of a room could darken with no explanation. A child in that environment can't afford to be caught off guard, so they develop something, a finely tuned internal radar. They learn to read micro-expressions, to sense tension before it becomes sound, to adjust themselves preemptively, to manage what might be coming. They become extraordinarily skilled at feeling the room. Not because they were gifted, because they were trying to stay safe. And the nervous system that builds that skill in childhood doesn't retire it when the danger passes. It carries the wiring forward, into friendships, into relationships, into every room they walk into for the rest of their lives, still scanning, still absorbing, still making itself quietly responsible for the emotional comfort of everyone nearby. What began as survival became personality, and personality for an empath became an invisible contract, one they never agreed to but somehow keep honoring. Give everything, ask for nothing, make it look effortless. But here's what no one wrote into that contract. You cannot carry everyone's weight without eventually buckling under your own. You cannot be the safe place for every person in your life if no one is being a safe place for you. You cannot pour endlessly from something that never gets refilled. The empath knew this, somewhere underneath everything. But asking for refilling, asking to be held, to be heard, to receive even a fraction of what they gave, felt dangerous, because needing things early on sometimes meant disappointment, sometimes meant being too much, sometimes meant the very connection they were trying to protect would fracture, so they learned not to ask. And after enough years, they forgot how. What built in that silence, not resentment. Empaths rarely allow themselves resentment, was something far quieter and far more dangerous, a slow erosion, a growing distance between who they actually were and who they kept performing. A hollowness spreading in the place where their own needs should have lived, present for everyone around them, increasingly a stranger to themselves. Now hold that inside your body for a second. Don't just understand it intellectually, actually feel what that would be like. You are the one who stays late, who checks in, who remembers, who sits with people in their worst moments and asks for nothing in return. People leave your conversations lighter. You drive home carrying everything they walked away from. You lie awake processing emotions that were never even yours. And no one asks how you are. Not in the way you ask others. Not with that quality of attention. Not in a way that makes you feel like the answer genuinely matters. And you don't tell them. because making your exhaustion their problem feels like the most unbearable thing you could do. Because even when you're drowning, the instinct is to reach for others, not to call for help yourself, so you keep going. Until the day you can't. The disappearance is almost never a decision. It doesn't arrive from a final argument, a clear betrayal, a definable breaking point. It comes from a single ordinary moment, unremarkable from the outside, where something deep in the empath simply stops pretending. Maybe it's a Tuesday night after a conversation where they gave everything and left with nothing. Maybe it's lying in the dark, chest tight, suddenly aware of how long they've been running on empty. Maybe it's just a moment of stillness where the performance stops holding, and they feel fully, for the first time, how much this has cost them. And something ancient in their body makes a choice, not with cruelty, not with a plan. With the quiet, absolute intelligence of a system that has finally reached its limit, they go still. From the outside, it looks like withdrawal, coldness, maybe even punishment. But from the inside that silence that looks like abandonment, something is happening that the people left behind never get to witness. The empath, alone now, comes face to face with something that has been waiting for them, themselves. Not the version that exists in response to other people's needs. Not the helper, the listener, the one who stays. The person underneath all of that. With desires they stopped naming, with limits they stopped acknowledging, with a voice that got so quiet over the years they nearly forgot it belonged to them. And meeting that person is not peaceful. It is disorienting in the way that all long overdue things are disorienting. Because an empath is fluent in every inner world except their own. They know how to sit with other people's grief, other people's confusion, other people's fear. Sitting with their own, without the structure of someone else to care for, feels formless and unfamiliar and impossibly vast. Grief moves through that space. Real grief. For the years spent giving what they needed to keep. For the relationships where they loved without limit and received without reciprocity. For the child they once were, who learned before they could explain it that being needed was the safest way to be loved. But inside that grief, something begins to shift, slowly, imperfectly. Without announcement, the empath starts to feel, maybe for the first time, where they actually end and another person begins. They start to sense the difference between compassion and self-erasure. Between staying because you genuinely want to and staying because you don't believe you're allowed to leave. Between love that flows from fullness and love that flows from fear of what happens if you stop. They begin asking questions they've never once asked themselves. What do I feel? Separate from what the people around me feel. What do I actually want, not as someone's support system, but as a person in my own right? What would it look like to be in a relationship where I didn't have to disappear to make it work? These are not small questions. They don't have fast answers. And the empath has to stay inside the discomfort of not knowing, rather than rushing towards someone else's discomfort, which always felt more manageable than their own. This is the work happening behind the silence, the work that no one on the outside can see. And now I want to speak to you directly. Whether you're someone trying to understand an empath who left, or an empath who recognizes what I've been describing as your own exhausted life. If someone like this disappeared from your world, if someone who made you feel seen, who held your heaviest moments with care, who seemed to love you without condition suddenly went quiet, hear this: they did not run out of love for you. Love for an empath is not what depletes. What depleted was their capacity to love you while simultaneously abandoning themselves. And that capacity, no matter how wide the empath's heart, has a limit. For every human being, it has a limit. Their distance is not a verdict on your worth. It is a measure of how long they went without mattering to themselves. And if you are an empath, if you have been living inside this exhaustion, recognizing each layer of it as I've laid it out, then I need you to hear what may be the most important thing you've never been told. The sensitivity you carry is not a flaw. It is not too much. It is not something you were supposed to quietly manage and never speak of until you disappeared entirely. What is a flaw? The only actual flaw in any of this is the belief you inherited before you were old enough to question it. The belief that your worth is measured by your usefulness. That love must be continuously earned through availability. That you are only allowed to take up space if you are simultaneously making space for everyone else. That belief was written into you in a home, in a moment, in a version of your life where it was the safest thing to believe. It kept you close to the people you needed. It kept things stable. It worked But it is still running, and it is costing you things you can't afford to keep losing. You are allowed to rest without justifying the rest. You are allowed to need without apologizing for the need. You are allowed to receive the kind of presence you have given freely to others your entire life. And the relationships that can hold you when you arrive as a full person, with limits, with needs, with a self that takes up real space. Those are the only relationships that were ever truly built to last. Because an empath who has stopped disappearing into others doesn't become less loving. They become, for the first time, available in a way that is real, not performed, not sustained by fear, not costing them the slow erasure of everything they are, just present, whole. Finally, quietly here. And that, after everything, is not the end of their story. It is the first honest page of it.